Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where my awesome co-host, epic fantasy author Richard H. Stevens, and I speak with people from all walks of the publishing industry. Lurking for Legends is a live interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or simply make comments on what you hear in the show. So tonight we have David Ellis, known across platforms by his handle Too Full to Write, if you're looking for him. He's a writer, he's a podcaster, lyricist, humorist, novelist, an author, and a poet, not to mention the co-founder of Auroras and Blossoms. So there's a lot to talk about there. Welcome, David. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you both for having me on the show today.
No, you're welcome.
Absolutely. It's such an honor to have you and a real pleasure. I've had the pleasure of talking to you before, and really it's so easy to go on and on. So we're going to have to control ourselves here. So tell us a little bit about yourself just to start with.
Okay, yeah. So I used to work in the financial services industry. I clocked up about 17 years there, but I never lost my passion for the English language and literature itself as well. It's the only thing I really excelled at school. You know, I was kind of average in most other sort of subjects, but really, really good at English language. It's something that I've always harbored a sort of passion for. And it's only really, I'd say, within the last few years, I say going back to 2016, that I actually started to seriously take my kind of writing career a bit more seriously than I had done years ago. I kind of wrote sort of lots of spoof lyrics. I made a couple of music albums, and they were never released commercially. But they had kind of sort of a comedy undertones. And in 2016, I joined a local writers circle, and they encouraged me and said, "Let's start a blog and do something with your blog." And I'd had no idea what I was going to do. And because I was writing all these song lyrics, I thought, why don't I try writing poetry? Because I wasn't writing many sort of hooks for the songs, and also I was writing lots of long verses, and they didn't really fit sort of song structures. And from there, that's when I feel my birth as a poet began. It was kind of like in gestation for many years while I was working in financial services, getting bored out of my mind. And I'd be writing lots and lots and lots of lyrics to kind of while the time. I'd be writing things every day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. I always had that mantra with Bob Dylan. I think he said something like write 10 songs a day and throw 9 away. But I kept everything that I did. I had about 200 in these song lyrics in the end, and a lot of them were funnily enough they were quite negative at the time, because I was upset with the bit working in the financial industry. And then when I started becoming a poet in 2016, really kind of seriously looking at my poetry and trying to ape my sort of peers, I ended up becoming a very positive person. So I kind of flipped everything on its head there and became a very positive poet in relation to inspiration, romance, philosophy and comedy and that kind of stuff. I wanted to entertain people. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up writing 3 books in 2016. And then I kind of had a lull with that. And then things picked up again in 2019 when I formed Auroras and Blossoms with my co-founder, Sandrine Marois. And once I formed that platform, it's an inspirational art platform. So I'm sure you want to talk to me about that as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And she's in the chat right now. Thank you so much for coming. So definitely, yeah, we'll just start with that. And I know that we're not going to spend all our time on that, because I believe we will be interviewing both of you together at another point. So we'll talk about it most in depth then. But yeah, definitely tell us a little bit about what Auroras and Blossoms is. And of course, that's someplace people can submit. So they should definitely check out the website. I'll go get it.
They definitely should do. I mean, ultimately, I don't want to steal the thunder of the upcoming interview with the two of us and with Sandrine herself as well. But just to give you a brief sort of cliff notes, Sandrine and I were kind of like on each other's radar. We interviewed each other on our respective blogs, and we talked about how there was a lack of positivity in terms of what poetry we were seeing, the poetry that's been submitted to other journals that were out there. And we said, why don't we form a poetry journal, a positive poetry journal? And we ended up doing that. We put a lot of work in. We spent months tweaking the website and getting it all ready. And we launched the Auroras and Blossoms Poetry Journal in 2019. We then launched a creative arts journal, because we didn't want to restrict ourselves to just poetry. And then from there, we were like, well, why don't we try and merge the two? And we did that. And then we did a lot of other things like workbooks and journals. We started an artistic movement called Po Art Mo. There was a collective that Sandrine was with, but she merged that into, and it's now the Po Art Mo Collective. So we've got that as well. We've got art projects with other kind of artists and writers. We deal with photographers, illustrators, short story people, flash fiction people, alongside poetry people as well. So we've really kind of expanded our platform, but we have shut down the poetry side, poetry journal side for now, because people weren't happy paying submission fees. We charged a very low submission fee, but we had to actually close it down this year. Because people just weren't submitting to us anymore, and we were having a lot of trouble with people that were being rude and weren't following our instructions. You know, a lot of people would improve their chances of being published in a magazine if they read the instructions properly, and if they weren't so blasé about how they just chucked things at people, if they didn't try and just blast it to someone's email address. Or actually, you know, you should really kind of see if it's relevant for the publication you're sending it to. But yeah, so we kind of shifted gears, and our focus now is anthologies, workbooks and journals, the artistic movement, and we've created our own poetry forms and a written form as well. So we've got several forms that we've created as well, and we have the artistic projects. We've just got so much, and I think I went from the 3 publications that I told you about in 2016 to when I got involved with Sandrine and the Auroras Blossoms 2019. I've gone up to now nearly 30 publications that we've been involved with so far.
That's amazing. 30. How do you do it? That's incredible.
Well, I've got 8 books myself now, so I feel like the Auroras and Blossoms magic rubbed off on me as well. I've actually slowed down when it comes to publication of my own books. But yeah, and you're holding one of them up there right now.
Nice. Now, I see that I was going through your website and I saw all the different books that you write, and there's quite a cross section of books that you do write, like from inspirational to positive beliefs. And then I came across one that really stood out to me.
I think I know which one you're going to say, but it's going to make me laugh, I think.
Yeah, 50 Shapes of Cake.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that, because that's the one that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb with the.
Yeah, I read the word about it, and it says that you probably won't be the same after you've done reading this book. And what the initial thing that went through my mind was that, as authors, we get a bunch of readers behind us that like our stuff, and they keep reading our stuff because they like it. So have you ever had readers that, they love your Shakespeare, your inspirational Shakespeare poetry and your inspiration, the other books that you write, and all of a sudden come across 50 Shapes of Cake and send you some kind of comment saying, this is not what I expected?
They say, this sounds too rude and too, you seem so nice, and why are you doing something like that? But I think that, I probably should have gone with the author mantra of setting up a separate pen name for that, simply because when it's kind of sort of brought into the kind of sort of portfolio of stuff that I've done, there has been a couple of instances where people have said, you're family friendly, so what are you doing with this filth? And to what I say is, well, it's not filthy, because actually, if they actually read the book, they would realize that I've actually turned into, if you can imagine the kind of erotica and sex books and stuff like that, I've kind of made a PG erotica kind of book, because every time the innuendo kind of sort of comes up, it started out in life as I saw a lot of people doing tweets. And there was 50 Shades of Grey, and I come up with a concept of saying, well, what if I did it about cakes? Because cakes are very funny. Cakes make you hungry, but also the analogy with cakes is that they can be very kind of sort of, you see the chefs, the TV chefs like Nigella Lawson, Jamie Oliver, Gordon Ramsay, and they talk about things in dirty sort of ways, but they do it with a lot of innuendo. And I just thought, I could do that with cakes. And cake products. So that's what I tried to do it. It was kind of sort of, people mistook me. They thought I was a baker. They actually interviewed me for a newspaper, and they went and said, "Oh, baking aficionado David Ellis." And I'm kind of like, they said, "Do you bake, David?" And I said, "Well, no." And then they weren't interested in the story anymore, because they thought I was a baker. But so I ended up, it started off as tweets, and then I made it into a book collection. But it's very much kind of like, I don't know if you're aware of the Carry On films, the kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. And that's where it kind of sort of stemmed from, is that there were silly little things. Like I would think about anything to do with, erotica. I would steal things from erotica, and I would start the sentence off, and you would just be thinking, oh, this is getting a bit steamy, and you start pulling your collar back and thinking, oh, this is going to be juicy. And then the punchline would come up, and then you'd just be like, what? I don't understand what just happened there. And I would draw lots of different influences. Like one of the things I can remember off the top of my head was that when they make that joke about, they're saying, you know what they say about men with big feet, and then wink, wink, kind of sort of thing. And then they're waiting for the punchline, and then it said, and then I said, they can get to the bakery quicker. And so it's just, there was like lots of kind of sort of, so there was puns, but there was lots of things about like doing things with cakes and bread, like and how you make them and how sensual it was. And then, you know, I think one of the ones that I use in my kind of advert for it, I've got a trailer for it, was about how someone is relentlessly having their head banged against the headboard. And then it's at that point he realized he should have bought his wife custard donuts instead of jam ones. And it's so every time I keep taking something like that, and I had an American reader read it, and she just said some of the things went over her head because she said it seems very British and there's a lot of British humor in it. And I was just like, well, there is, but at the same time, I feel like it's still very universal in the themes and stuff there. And, you know, when I did it, I just thought, I have to list it in kind of like the erotica kind of categories, but I'm like, but there's no real erotica in it. There's comedy. So I was hoping that would actually help boost it as well, because I'm kind of taking an affectionate poke or stab at the erotica genre. But I've also created the first, what I call PG erotica comedy kind of sort of book. And that's why I find when I was writing about it, I know someone local to me actually went and said on a tweet, "Oh, you know, 50 shapes of cakes, that's disgusting. What he's doing or whatever." And I remember having a conversation with my uncle and saying, "Well, good. I'm glad it's making her angry because I'm going to do it even more now." So I'm that kind of sort of person. Is that if someone tells me not to do something, but for the wrong reasons, then I'll okay, well, I'm going to keep doing it even harder now. So.
No, I think it's brilliant, and that's why I brought it up, because you know, and I think it's great that you did not use a pen name. That, you know, this is you, this is David Ellis, and if the people want to get to know, you know, their favorite author, then they want to know all about David. They don't want you to be fake or false or whatever. I know people use pen names for different things to sell different genres and stuff like that, but I think it's brilliant that you just kept your name there, and people see that. And, you know, if anyone knows the Brits, they know they have that little bit of a bizarre sense of humor, and that, you know, just take it with a grain of salt and enjoy the book for what it is. So, no, that's awesome. I thought it was so cute when I was looking through. I see all these inspirational books and Shakespeare and all that, you know, deep stuff, and then 50 Shapes of Cake. You know, what's that?
Well, that's what I'd like to try, and that's why I did it, because I wanted to kind of sort of show how resourceful I can be when it comes to different things, and how broad my scope can kind of be, because I know a lot of people focus on things, but I kind of feel like I like to keep the talent unfolding and trying different things. And it can be jarring, because people will kind of come for the poetry, and just one person went and said, actually reviewed it and they went and said, this poetry's awful or wrong or something. And I was like, it's not poetry. It's basically the reason they're so short. But then because Twitter made me a great editor as well of my own work, especially when it comes to poetry and things, because you had to restrict it to the character limit. So I'd had to be very kind of sort of judicious with the use of commas and how I phrase things and grammar and things. And I didn't want everything to be the same way, because a lot of the tweets were just conversations between two people. And so it's characters and dialogue. So it's a dialogue between a couple of people, and some of them actually were Anastasia and Christian Grey. So I'd have Anna or Christian, but I wouldn't mention their full names. And then I kind of like, so I did actually use the first 50 Shades of Grey book as inspiration for it. I think I started reading the second one, but then people lost interest, and I've not really been able to push it. I feel it's one of those things where the market's saturated now. You had the movies now as well, and I still think it's very, very funny as a concept. And I'd love to do more of it, and I think I might do it in the future when things are still sort of calmed down, because to me it still seems fresh and funny. But there's only so many different cakes and biscuit types you can take the mickey out of, and so eventually you start to run out of inspiration.
That's great. And Christie didn't. We've got a lot of comments just keep coming in. I think Christie had a hard time keeping up with them. But go ahead, Christie.
Yeah, let's. Well, we have some really funny stuff here because of the erotica type of theme that's really cracking me up. And I asked Rebecca Jonesy, who has written that kind of genre before. I asked her, you said PG erotica, and I said, is that allowed? And she says that she gives it the Josie stamp of approval and encouragement. And she says, dirty clean, I call it.
Dirty clean. Yeah. This is the thing, you know, it's just, I mean, if I gave one example, I don't know, I said something about someone, and I don't know whether I can say this. I mean, am I allowed to, it's not swearing, but I mentioned about somebody having, screaming out saying they had blue balls. And I said, when I specifically asked for hundreds and thousands, now hundreds and thousands are some kind of sprinkle kind of sort of thing you put on cupcakes. But I then went and found some royalty-free pictures in like Pixabay and stuff, and I found a gingerbread man, and he was decorated with blue balls. And I just thought that's funny because I've taken the erotica kind of sort of thing, which is the naughty side, and then I turned it on its head, and that's the kind of sort of thing that I was doing. And you know, it's kind of liberating to be able to sort of say something like this, because I thought, I know I'm going to be sensitive, but you see, so I've spoken about it, but it's kind of, you know, it's almost kind of taking you know, the innuendo, the kind of erotic genre itself, and just completely flipping it on its head. And I keep saying to myself, I wish I could come up with a concept as good as that again, because I feel like it's lightning in a bottle, and I really would love to do that again. So.
It's a lot. It sounds like a lot of fun. I think everybody in the comments is having a lot of fun. Margaret is saying, I mean, Ladyfingers writes its own jokes, you know.
Exactly. Some of the things are so naughty, like pound cake. It's just like, oh, okay, and so on and so on. It's just like, yeah. It's just this is how it lends it. Because also, a lot of women came to me and sort of saying like, they thought that the whole thing was elegant. You know, they say cakes are elegant and cooking is elegant and stuff as well. And I like that sort of sensual side as well. But then some people were saying to me, is this a recipe book? And I said, no, I don't know any recipes. It's just a humor book. And they didn't like what I'd done to cake. So we get some people that love the idea, and especially bakers. I got a couple of compliments from bakers, and I just thought that's so sweet, because it's like they were kind of like, they thought it was hilarious. And I just thought, good, because that was the kind of sort of, not who I was pitching it to, but I thought if they like it, then I've managed to trick people into thinking, as I said, you know, that I thought I was a baker. That's my chameleonic kind of sort of way of dealing with things, is that I kind of get so deep into my kind of sort of character and research and stuff, and then I can fool people into thinking that I'm actually competent at sort of something when when I'm not, when I'm just a trickster. I'm a bit sort of like Loki or something.
Well, we have a number of questions for you actually in the comments, and before we get into that, I do want to read David Kelly's comment, which is referring back to something you said earlier. Asimov was once contacted by a reader complaining that his history of the Bible was just that, a history of the Bible and not sci-fi. So that kind of goes along with what you're saying about, you know, people not quite grasping the concept even when you tell them just what it is exactly in plain English.
Well, I try to put a kind of sort of plain message in a lot of my poetry and stuff. I try to make things very sort of straightforward and have a clear message, but then that takes away some of the mystery and drama and things. So sometimes I do try to leave things a little bit abstract or ambiguous. But sometimes when I do that, I don't know if I leave it too abstract or ambiguous. I don't know if people are left high and dry. So I like to have some kind of thing, some kind of emotional core to grab people. Something doesn't have to necessarily make absolute sense, or it can be kind of like a bit kind of like off the shelf, or off the cuff. But at the same time, if it's got some kind of, I like to have something to have either be cathartic or have some kind of powerful, punchy message, underlying message in it.
Yeah, and it's such a truth about poetry that, you know, especially with limited words and depending on your form, you know, of course, like you're saying, it's very easy to have. Amanda is saying super concept. It's so easy to write something that you understand, but then maybe other people won't quite get, and trying to make sure it's like, you know, they'll get it, but at the same time leaving it, you know, maybe metaphorical or for their interpretation that can get you hits and stuff. Yeah, it's a great point. It's very tricky sometimes to determine what you want to do exactly to still have it be yours, you know, but also. And
I try not to hang on to things too hard as well. Like I'm very used to okay, I've written this, I'm going to edit it to the best of my ability, and I can be satisfied with something. Some things might take me a little longer than I want them to, but I can pump out poems, say in an hour or two, or quicker sometimes. It all depends on the inspiration, but sometimes it might take 4, 5, 6 hours or something, but I'll usually keep working on something until I'm happy with it. But I won't do the thing where you kind of put things in a drawer. I do that with I would do that with short stories and things, but I feel like because when you're writing poetry or flash fiction or something like that, it's such a short, small kind of sort of piece. I can usually edit that sort of stuff very, very quickly, because there's only a certain number of ways you can kind of interpret or do something. And I've shortened my poetry a lot. I used to write 30 lines every single time, and I would do NaPoWriMo, National Poetry Writing Month, and I would make myself ill at the end of the month because I'd do 30 lines every day, and I'd just be like, surely there's got to be a better way. And then I learned I could write shorter poetry and shorter poems a lot quicker. And now most of my poems are only 10, 15 lines, sometimes shorter than that a lot of the time, especially when I'm doing found poetry as well. So
you mentioned NaPoWriMo, and I'd never heard of that before. I'm not a poet, but it makes sense that we have a NaPoWriMo as well. And I was looking on your website, and last year you wrote a poem for every day in the month of November. And are those the 30-line poems that you wrote?
No, they're found poetry. It's found poetry. So around about a couple of years ago, I started almost exclusively dealing in found poetry. But before then, I was doing. Well, before I was writing freeform poetry, where I could write any number of lines in the poem. I wasn't following any particular style or form. I have done forms in the past. They're good exercises. It's fun sometimes if I want. They don't give me inspiration in terms of I have to combine them with some other kind of theme. If I say I'm going to write a Villanelle poem, for example, just because I say I'm going to write a Villanelle poem doesn't give me the inspiration to write one. I have to say I'm going to write it about cakes. So I write it about cakes, and then I have to combine the elements. Yeah, I mean, with my poetry, I discovered what I like to think of as the Holy Grail. And it caused me to go and buy tons and tons and tons of poetry books from charity shops, thrift stores and stuff like that. And they're all sitting on my shelf because basically I'm going to go through every single one and I'm going to steal so much inspiration. I say steal, I mean, basically I'm going to take inspiration, not steal, from all these people, all these wonderful people. So found poetry is where you take a piece of written text. You usually take one page. So it works well with poetry if you've got one page of poetry, although I have done a found poem based on one of Walt Whitman's poems, and since he's had hundreds of pages on that, the poem that I made had about 100 lines in the end. It was quite an epic kind of one that I wrote. But usually found poetry means that you're pinching words from a text. You're kind of like picking out the words that you like, and you're drawing them out of that, and you're creating something new. And you can do it with almost any piece of written text. You could do it with with a TV guide, although the thing is, if you use something that isn't quite sort of literary, that's why I like to use books. So I like to use a page from a book or a page from poetry, because if you do a bit of non-fiction work or a TV guide or something like that, it's going to have a lot of dry language. You're going to want to have something that's got colourful language in there. You're not going to want to pinch the stuff. Like if you went and grabbed a Harry Potter book, for example, you're not going to put a poem in there and start mentioning. You can mention Harry, but you can't say Potter, obviously. And maybe even Hermione, but and some of the other characters. But the problem is you shouldn't be using anything that's copyrighted in terms of character names or anything like that. But what you can do is go through a piece and just go, oh, I like them words, and then from there you try and build. And the way I try to do it is I try to write something completely different. Some people, they talk about, when you talk about plagiarism, you can say you can normally get away with stealing one line, but if you take a second line, and you don't want the line to be easily identifiable as well, because if you steal something that is very unique to someone, some kind of one line or quip or something from a famous book or novel, you're going to get found out. It's plagiarism. But what I like to do is take a particular piece of text or a poem and try to write a completely different poem based around that. And I can give you an example. Like I wrote, I think, How to Be a Writer, I think by Charles Bukowski. And I think it's called How to Be a Writer, and his is quite negative all the way through, and it says don't do this, don't do that. And I just went through it and I just went, okay, I'll turn it to a positive poem by just taking out all the don'ts. And I rewrote, and so I came up with a brand new original poem. So sometimes you can take kind of sort of negative poem or poetry or negative words from sort of somewhere, or a negative kind of sort of piece, and turn that into a positive. That's always been my philosophy about saying, can you turn a negative into positive or something inspirational? And found poetry is just the process, and I do it in a very specific way. So some people might jiggle the words around, and then it doesn't become necessarily called found poetry. I do it in a way it's called blackout poetry, where I use the words where I find them, and then I then go through that way. And what happens is that sometimes it forces me to use very specific grammar or techniques And also it forces me to use words. I have to end things in a certain way, and it means that I write things in a certain way that I wouldn't normally write myself. And that's what's so fun and fascinating about it, and what's endlessly inspirational, and makes me think that I'm going to have infinite inspiration. I'm not going to have enough time in my life to write all the books of poetry that I want to do, because I can literally draw inspiration from any book. And it's not just, when I say any book, is that you think about any book has 200 or 300 pages. So I could flick to any page in any book, and I could say, right, I can probably write something based on that. It might be that I can't immediately do that, but I've generally found that the harder it is, the better the piece comes out. You know, I might be able to get something out of that. And yeah, thank you very much for your comment, Mandy. It is incredibly intriguing, because you can literally just take anything. And that's why I like to, you know, I've always said I like to use, if I take an inspirational poem by Mary Oliver, chances are I'm going to write an inspirational poem. It's going to be very flowery language and very kind of happy myself. But it's kind of interesting to see what happens when you take something that isn't positive, and either you make something positive out of it, because then you can definitely say, oh, people can't see what you've stolen from someone else. But then if you take someone like Edgar Allan Poe, which I wrote a book of poems about, or the Shakespeare, sometimes they take on a little bit of the flavour, but then I write them in my own kind of sort of way. So the language might come across as a bit of sort of ye olde worldy sort of things, but I try not to do that much, because I don't want someone to have to think, oh, they've got to try and, you know, understand that I'm trying to make the message still clear. But I will be saying things where the grammar and the kind of the way it's kind of sort of structured and the way it's framed don't come out the way I would normally write something. I'd normally write something when I'm doing freeform, something very clear, positive. I might go on different tangents. I might do some comedy. I might do some romantic kind of sort of poetry. But with found poetry, the fascination for me is kind of like, what will you get out of it? And I tell you, I go into it and I get things out of it, and then I'd share with people. I'm in a group called the New Romantics. It's NU and then Romantics. And there's a private group, but they've got their own kind of page as well. And they do a lot of romantic, saucy and naughty kind of sort of poetry and stuff. And I write a lot of inspirational stuff for that group. I've even done prompts for them as well. And you kind of get their prompts and you just don't know what you're going to get out of it. And a lot of the time I'll pair it with a nice graphic, and people will be like, wow, that's amazing. I'll just be like, well, that's just what I see. So it's kind of, maybe it's reading between the lines. Maybe that's just what I see when I write, and that's what I do now. Basically, I mean, I'm addicted to it so much. And as you say, Richard, I did NaPoWriMo for 5 years. I didn't do this year because of just with the pandemic, and I just felt too tired to do it because I'm very busy with Auroras and Blossoms. So I thought I'd take a break this year, and also they never feature me, so I'm not bitter or anything. But basically, you know, I've been doing it for a few years. And I've been doing the freeform thing, and I've been following their prompts and things. And some of the things that I found is that when they gave a prompt, they'd be like, do a Villanelle poem. And I'd be like, well, okay, but that's not enough for me. But sometimes they would say, do something about snow. And you just go, okay, let's have a look at all the classical poems that have been written about snow. Then I could then pick someone, and I'd pick and say, okay, Emily Dickinson has done one about snow years ago. Her poems are very short, by the way. So you'd have to try and write haikus out of them. You could maybe do a found haiku, because she hasn't got a lot of words to draw on. I'd like to try and find people that have got at least a few words to draw on, but I've got so many people that I've written poems based around, as Maya Angelou and Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath and you know, Jane Austen, and absolutely, you know, tons and tons of and some contemporary poets as well. So but yeah, haikus are very, very good. I just saw Anita's comment there about haikus. They are very, very good if you want to write sort of something short. And but then we created a found poetry style, myself and Sandrine, based around. It was a combination of found poetry and the haiku nature. You know, we end up calling it the kainku. And what we do with that is that we take 7 words from a piece of writing. So you could go back to something like an Emily Dickinson poem and say, I could actually find 7 words here, because I can't actually get a poem out of here because it's just too small. You know, her verse is too short. But we could write kainkus about the thing. So I then found that I had another facet of all this found poetry that I was writing, saying, oh my God, I can write endless kainkus for the shorter poems that I got now. So whereas that I had to discard some of the very, very short poems that people have written, I was like, now I can do something with that as well. So I've really got all the inspiration that I could find. I'd have to be like James Patterson, and I have to teach people my technique, and then they say, right, we're going to write them under the umbrella of David Ellis, and then I'll put out 200 books a year or something.
That doesn't sound too bad, actually. JD Estrada is asking, any spoken word plans? That is an interesting one.
Well, I tried to start to record my debut poetry collection, Life, Sex and Death, which, funnily enough, so it's got the word sex in it, and that kind of put some people off. And I said, it's romantic. There's no talk about, there's no dirty words. There's no actual sex in there. So I kind of say to myself, I wish I hadn't called it that. But I said, well, it's my name, LSD, David Ellis, LSD, L, S and D, Life, Sex and Death. And because I wrote some music years ago under MCLSD, so I just thought I'm going to do something with that and with the LSD, and that's why I did the Life, Sex and Death. But I started trying to read some of the stuff that I wrote in that, and I kind of was a bit of a masochist when it comes to myself in terms of I didn't really leave a kind of clear, easy pathway for me to be able to read sort of stuff in the future. I made lots of tongue twisters, and I found that with my second book, which I think you mentioned, the Soul Music book as well, is that I would say probably my first 2 or 3 books of freeform poetry, there are some real tongue twisters in there, and I can hear them in my head and I can speak them. But when it comes to actually doing an audio version, I struggled on some sort of things, and you definitely don't want to be drinking when you're doing that as well, because I tried doing that in a live poetry session. And I got really kind of sort of tongue-tied and messed up. And they were just like, what is he doing to himself? They were like, this is beautiful poetry, but, he's not made it easy on himself. And I'd just be like, they just thought, does he hate himself or something that much? Why would he do something like this? He's supposed to be an inspirational person. But, so I kind of, but what I'd like to do is go back to the Poe one and the Shakespeare one and do those. I think I could do those in a dramatic kind of sort of voice. But then they're not in the tone of either Shakespeare dramatism, or they're not in they're not horror poems when it comes to the Poe poems. So I've had this kind of sort of difficult thing where I've tried to market the Poe poetry and the Shakespeare stuff to people that like those things, but they go in there thinking, am I going to be reading some more Shakespeare or more Edgar Allan Poe? And it's like, well, no, not really, because there's inspirational poetry in there and romantic poetry and that sort of stuff, but it doesn't, and you can see shades or hints of the original person. You can see shades of Shakespeare and Poe, but they're not identical, and I think so that's the kind of thing I've struggled with in terms, I think, of generally sort of marketing those things. I'm going to write more Shakespeare. I've only written the first 50 sonnets, so there's still the other 150. It's 154 in total, so I've still got another 104 to do, but they don't tend to take very long because they're all very sort of short, and you can quickly kind of knock through them all. But I love him. I mean, that's why I picked Shakespeare, because I didn't like Shakespeare to begin with years ago. And, I kind of fell in love with his sort of stuff. I think I didn't like him because I didn't understand a lot of what he was saying. And it was the English teacher's interpretation of what he was saying that kind of sort of made me frustrated. And when I started taking it on my own terms, I started enjoying it a lot more. So I see JD's
that makes
got
total
a question
sense.
for me.
Yeah, he has a few questions. He has one more after this, and we also have one from Margaret, so I do want to make sure we fit them in. JD says, hardest rhyme scheme poem you've ever written and why? That's a tricky one. I wouldn't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, the problem is that my mind is kind of sort of like I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. I always say that to people, and then you say, well, how am I going to remember all of the kind of sort of things? I will tell you, actually. Yeah, I think I can tell him. So I did one particular poem, and it's not so much the rhyme scheme, but then that was involved in it, but it was also the structure. So I'm very good at rhyming, I think, and this is why I thought I would end up being a cool musician, but I can't play any instruments, so I just tend to write sort of lyrics. But I wrote a poem called Passion, and I wrote it so that the left-hand side of the word spelled out passion. The title spelled out passion, but it was whatever I called the poem. So it had a P and an A and so and so. Then it had passion on the right. And then just to make it just a little bit harder, it had passion down the middle. And when I explained it to people, they just go, oh, that sounds quite cute. That sounds quite interesting. And then you show it to people and they just go, how did you do that? It's like I've shown them, something that they'll never, ever going to be able to work out how to do. And to be honest, it's kind of just like it's annoying, because when you put it into a book or a book of poetry, depending on how it's the formatting sort of comes across, it's nice to be able to sort of see it on a blog post or a kind of sort of thing where you can inflate the screen, because that's when everything lines up. And I got the idea because my first poem in my first debut book was I called it Acrostoliptica, which was and it wasn't actually acrostic, it was an abecedarian, which is a alphabetical poem, A through Z. But to make it more difficult, I did it A through Z on the left hand side and then the right hand side as well. So in order to make it work, I had to use the word like barbecue, but I had to put BBQ. because there's nothing that ends with the letter Q. So you had to be sort of creative in that sort of respect. But I then started building things based around that, and I wrote some other ones that were like using lots of particular similar sounding words. There was a lot of alliterative sort of words, so I'd have alliterature, abstract, acrostylictica. But this is what I'm talking about. Imagine trying to read that out on an audio book. I'd have to just take a deep breath and and try and get my tongue untwisted, and then I'd probably twist it up again every time I tried to do it. But to answer JD's question, I think it's I've had kind of sort of I like rhyme structures in terms of they give me direction. I like having something in place, like a structure in place, because it actually makes things easier for me. I just have to kind of sort of put something around it and then just go okay. And I often bring up silly things like I said, okay, about grass, all the weather outside. Let's do that, and let's put something around that, and I can build that around that framework. But I think the absolute toughest ones are the ones where you try to do the wordplay. But I don't think I've ever found anything more difficult than that one that I did, where I'd put it in the title and the left, right, and middle side as well. And I think it's in one of my books. I can't remember which one. I don't know if it's actually in Soul Music. It might be the one that you've got, Christie. It's just there's so many different kind of sort of forms and things that you can take from, and I find that very, very inspirational as well. You're not going to like everything. I think I like some of the mathematical forms. That's why I've always liked writing haiku, is that if I'm given a series of numbers, I can usually write to the number of words or syllables, or even a number of letters in sort of something. I think that even though I'm not a kind of mathematical person, my brain mathematically kind of sort of merges with the English language, and it becomes a puzzle. Someone said before it was like solving a puzzle. And that's what I feel like with found poetry sometimes, when I'm going through it and trying to make a sentence fit, and knowing that I've only got certain words that I can use towards the end as well. Sometimes I'll do big jumps in there, or I'll do big cuts or something, and it can be difficult because I can't figure out how to end this. But I'll walk away from it if I get too frustrated, and I'll come back and I'll always find a solution. And I've learned that about the subconscious brain. I read a book about it years ago, and it's just saying if you've got any kind of sort of problem, start the problem off in your mind, but even if you can't solve it, just start working on it. And then if you can't get somewhere, walk away, go for a walk, go and do something, play on a video game, watch a TV program, or have a shower, or just do anything. And I guarantee that your subconscious mind is going to be ticking away at that problem. And all of a sudden you're going to go, oh, eureka moment. I'm going to then come back and fix it that way. And it's always worked that way for me. If I can't think of if I've been looking for 2 hours to try and pair a picture with a poem because a lot of the time I won't write ekphrastically and write something from a picture. Sometimes I will, but most of the time I'll kind of pair a picture afterwards. I'll try and look for elements in the poem or something and say, what would match really, really well? Oh, I've been looking for 2 hours. I can't find anything. Walk away, come back, and then just think, oh, yeah, okay, that would actually work. And that's worked for me so many times. That's why I never really get writer's block or artist block, because if I do, then I'll just find a creative way to let off some steam and then come back to it.
Yeah, and it just amazes me, like the number. I want to get in JD's question and then Margaret's, but it amazes me, like the number of types of poetry you do. And I was an English literature major, and I don't even know some of the things that you're mentioning, because you just study kind of like the basics, the classics, all that kind of stuff. But there's so much more out there to try that so many people who might be not very experienced with poetry and think they're not good at it, maybe if they tried a different form, they would be good at it.
Yeah, I think you've got to really kind of keep your mind open. And as I appreciate that I'm not into, funnily enough, even though I like Shakespeare, sometimes they talk about I'm not into iambic pentameter and trying to work out meter and that kind of stuff, and stressed and unstressed syllables. I did a stressed and unstressed syllable, a cinquet or something like that. Cinquain, that was it, a cinquain. And or it could be cinquain, I don't know how to pronounce it properly. But I tried stressed and unstressed syllables, and that always brings me out in the rush, just thinking, oh, it's just too difficult. And every time I see something like that, I just think I'm not going to fight it. If I don't want to do it, maybe I'll become more and more kind of. If I get bored, I just think, okay, I'm going to try it now. I'm in the right frame of mind. I'm bored. I've done everything else. And everything else is boring me now. Maybe I'll try the difficult thing that I didn't want to do because it's a challenge. But stuff like that, so what I mean is I'll come along and I'll look at a whole kind of list of forms, and then I'll start saying, well, that one's got an ABCC rhyme structure. Well, I like that because they present it in that way. So therefore I'll list that down on a piece of paper. I'll put it down the side, and sometimes I'll have the kind of sort of guide marks there to sort of tell me and say, right, okay, I need to do this and do it in such a way. and that's how I can construct it. And then sometimes I forget I've left the guide marks there, so when I go to publish it, I'll have to delete those out again. And but yeah, it's just I think that you should look through the entire series of forms. And don't be afraid, just try the ones, because if you find one that you like, there's going to be about another 15, 20 on there that are going to have a similar kind of sort of structure, and you'll like those ones as well. And I found that, one of my poetry books, it might be also the soul music book as well. I've got just tons of forms that I tried because they were all variants on the form. They might have kind of repetition. I like trying to use repetition. I mean, I think it might be the villanelle or something like that, where you actually have to take 6 words and then use them in 6 different ways. And I just thought, oh my God, how difficult is that? Because not a lot of words have 6 different interpretations that you can get from them. Usually it's only like there's 2 or 3 ways that you can read them. So you kind of like find yourself building some kind of intricate kind of sort of thing. And some people don't like that. Some people just think, oh, it's too frustrating. But I've done it a couple of times now. And I found that once I've done it once, even if it was painful to do to begin with, I'm kind of just like, I'm relishing the challenge of doing it again. And this is the funny sort of thing is that I found is that if you kind of open up the door to certain sort of things, they give you the foundation or pave the way for something else. And this is why I've managed to get to where I am now, and why I've managed to publish so many things, why I've managed to do so many things. It's because I've learned how to do one thing, and I just thought, well, if I can do that, it means I can do that, and I can figure out how to put all the bits and pieces together and just keep building and building from that point.
Those are great points. And I think the question from JD on the screen has pretty much been answered by your cake book, The 50 Shades of Cake. But he says, has something you've written ever made you laugh? And I think that's a yes.
I'm heavily influenced by a lot of music as well, music lyrics and things and people. Especially, I do like a band called Electric Six. And he basically, the guy, Dick Valentine, I think his real name's Tyler Spencer. He says that 90% or 95% of their songs are about nothing at all. And I think he's lying, because a lot of the things that he writes is very, very funny. But they seem insightful in some sort of ways. And you just think you can't be saying that a lot of this sort of stuff is, but he'll say nonsense things like every policeman needs a chief. And things like that. And what JD was saying was that I tend to laugh at my own sort of comedy. If I laugh at my own comedy, people think, well, you laugh at your own jokes. But I find that as a kind of, I can read things as a reader as well as a writer. So I can kind of switch the writer brain off and just go, okay, I'm going to read this as a reader. Oh, that makes me laugh. And my comedy bits, if it doesn't make me laugh, I just think, okay, well, I'll work on it until it makes me laugh. And to give an example, I wrote a poem using heavily influenced by Electric Six, was called Hot Little Biscuit. And because of the whole kind of cakes and the other kind of sort of stuff as well. But that kind of thing made me laugh. And I was laughing about all of and the reason that it made me laugh so much when I think about it was because I was writing it in this kind of sort of style, in Dick Valentine / Tyler Spencer style. But it was all my own as well. So I'd be writing these kind of ridiculous lines in there, and it just made me laugh. I can imagine I've got a very good imagination, so I can imagine people singing this kind of sort of thing. But it wasn't a kind of sort of song. It was just a very, very long kind of storied sort of poem. It was a romantic, silly kind of sort of poem that I did. But often I will make myself laugh. Yes, I mean the 50 shapes of cakes thing. Yes, if I didn't laugh at the tweak, then I wouldn't have included it. I think there were some that I didn't actually include in the book. But there's a lot of humor in some of my, even though some of my debut had inspirational, romantic as well, and philosophical. Now the philosophical ones are just me basically saying that's my comedy ones. But then as time went on, I found myself writing more inspirational romantic poems, and then what I've now found is that I'm then combining the comedy elements into some of those. So you'll be reading a lot of serious ones, but then I remember something that the singer Mike Patton said from Faith No More. He said that he writes some humorous things, but he writes a lot of serious things. And he tends to say, when you do humor, you're taking a left turn immediately. And, so people might not want to they might not want to hear a joke 20, 30 times. It might be funny the first time. Whereas I find something serious, people can keep going back to again and again and again. And that's why I've kind of I give myself advice a lot in a lot of my poetry. And, you say writing for yourself. So I give myself advice on certain issues, and it could be on self-confidence or just life in general. And then if anybody else relates to it as well, then I'm happy. And I just think, well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to write something that's kind of positive and inspirational for myself. But it seems that it also, because it's emotionally kind of sort of connected to me and to everybody else as well, people really kind of sort of connect to my poetry because of the emotional bond that I sort of create with them when I do it. And even if it only gets through to sort of one person, you know, I said I'm happy. I'd like to have a huge audience, but when I get the odd person come to me saying, "Oh, well, that particular one really moved me," and it's accumulation as well, because sometimes I feel like, is anybody reading me out there? And then I'll get tons and tons of people say, "Well, yes, we think you're great," and I'm just like, wow, you know, and I'm so humbled, you know, so happy by it.
Going right off of that in our last couple of minutes, Margaret had asked, which do you sell more of, the nonfiction workbook side or the poetry side, or is it the more recent releases that do best as per the rule?
I would say, I don't know if it's even hilariously, I don't sell a lot of my poetry books. It's definitely the workbooks and the other sort of stuff that we're doing well with. I mean, that's why my kind of sort of publishing focus, I've got 8 books individually myself now. But I have 22 other publications with Auroras and Blossoms, because we like doing that, and we like providing that. And I feel like it's unfortunate for me that poetry is kind of just sort of like, I'll have a real kind of sort of core of 10, 15 people that are really into what I'm doing, but I won't win tons and tons of new kind of sort of people. I find it very difficult to market myself. I tried a couple of tricks, like, for example, I'll give you one of the examples of the tricks. Soul Music, The Colour of Magic, is a combination of 2 Terry Pratchett titles. So I was hoping to steal Terry Pratchett's thunder in relation to that. I'm one of the world's biggest Terry Pratchett fans. I love it. I love the video games. I love the books. I really do love the whole world of Discworld. I just think it's wonderful. And I love Neil Gaiman as well. I love absolutely love all of his stuff as well. And I'm still trying to catch up with all of his stuff. But, you know, I actually met Neil Gaiman as well. And he actually told me to make good art. I put a note on a book that I sent up to him, and everybody else, he was just signing stuff and pushing them on. And then he read my note, and I said, and he went and said, "What do you do, David?" And I said, "I'm a writer." And he says, "Well, please continue making good art." And it's like, I know he says that all the time, but it was just lovely to actually have him stop what he was doing. And I just thought I've had an impact on someone. I think it made my my co-writer, it wasn't Sandrine. I was with another writer in England at the time, and I think it made him a bit jealous, the fact that he was a big Neil Gaiman fan and he didn't get the same kind of same kind of interaction with him. But yeah, you know, so and that's why I did like Poe, for example. I've included a lot of the Poe poetry names in there. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that I'm trying lots of marketing tricks with my poetry. But as it just so transpires, we're going to have more people that want how-to guides, and we're going to have more people that are going to want visual things and other artistic things. Yeah, so I've sold some poetry books. I've given a lot of my poetry books away with my debut. And that didn't get me anywhere. It cost me, I'd say, hundreds of pounds to do that. So I would never, as a strategy, I thought people would feel more obligated to do something with an actual print copy. And I would say that I was very, very wrong. So don't ever go spending the money like that again, because I'm never going to recoup the investment on that. I'd have to sell probably 2,000 copies of my my debut poetry book, and I'm never going to sell that many copies, I don't think. I'd like to think I will do. I want to be really, really big, you know, like some of these people on Button Poetry and other sort of places that are doing really, really well. And I think with the right kind of marketing, the problem is that poetry on its own is that if I could become big, if I wrote a fantasy novel, then maybe I could get really big off of that and then say, now look at my poetry. And then I then get the cross promotion with that. But I haven't got round to doing that. I started writing a detective story with another author. It wasn't Sandrine. We got as far as about 6 chapters. But then I've never really kind of done anything more with that. And I kind of think one day I'm going to, but at the moment I'm just too caught up with Auroras and Blossoms and writing all the poetry as well. But everybody wants how-to books. Everybody wants we've got lots of things like on social media books as well, on how to promote yourself better on social media. And those ones have got more sales than much more sales than my own poetry books.
Well, I think it's funny how you say if you wrote fantasy, then maybe you could piggyback the poetry on it. I'm the fantasy author, and I'm kind of thinking the other way, that maybe if I wrote poetry, maybe I could piggyback my fantasy on it. Maybe some people would read it as well. So it all depends on what side of the boat you're sitting. But anyway, we just one more comment here we got from Tina McFarland's joined us, and she was saying, I think that you eventually find a style of writing poetry that works for you, but it's great to step outside your comfort zone. So thanks for joining us, Tina. I'm just conscious of the time. David, thank you very much for joining us. That's been great having you on here. And I think we had that's probably our busiest comment section in there we've had so far. People have really enjoyed. I think the 50 Shades of Cake really set it off. But
50 shapes of cake. This is the thing. It's because I think about the different shapes of cakes, and you just think, oh, that could be rude as well. So.
I'm gonna have to pick that up and read it and see what it's about. So, anyway.
I think you'll love it. I think you'll find it very funny.
Oh, I'm sure I will. I love the British comedy. My ancestors are from England, so I really enjoy it. So I just want to ask Christie before we go. Christie, do you have anything that you want to announce that's new in the Christie Stratos world?
Yeah, the only thing that I want to announce is that my Patreon is actually only $4 away from its first goal. And at that point, I'm going to be writing one short story a month guaranteed. So now I write flash fiction and short stories here and there, but I do other updates on there as well. And it's not always writing, a short story a month or anything like that. But once we reach that first goal, I will be doing that. And it's all different genres. It could be fantasy, it could be historical fiction, it could be something totally different, crime fiction, anything. But yeah, only $4 out. So I've had 3 people join in the past like 3 or 4 days, which is really fantastic. I'm super excited about that. So if anyone wants to join at just $1 a month, you get access to almost every single benefit there is. It's really just a place where we can have a community and all, chat, and I can share with you some exclusive fiction. So feel free to head on over there. It's just patreon.com/Christie Stratos. So that's my news this week. How about you, Richard?
I think that's awesome. And I think we all need to put the pressure on Christie Stratos and join that Patreon so we can make her write a story a month. we'll hold you to it. So my news is Keeper of the Jewels releasing next Tuesday. So I'm just doing the very finishing, polishing edit on it this week. I'm cramming myself all day and all night trying to just polish it a bit more. Amazon's given me the ticker. It's going off the end of Friday is my last day to actually upload the very final manuscript to Amazon. So anyway, it'll be live on Tuesday. Keeper of the Jewel is book 1, the Highcliffe Guardians series. And so next week, our guest is fantasy author Carrie Brown, and Carrie is the author of the Origo series. She's born in Tennessee, raised in Chicago. Carrie loves mythology, dark fairy tales, and anything medieval. And she's also decided to put them all together. Oh, so she's decided to put them all together in writing. Carrie's actually releasing book 2 this week. So it'll be interesting to speak to her to see how her launch went. And sorry, Dave, before we go, I should have asked you, where can people find your books?
I'm on Amazon. There is another David Ellis that is a lawyer, so you don't want to go looking for him. He writes with David Patterson as well, actually. So I once pretended to be him, and people said, "Don't do that. That's very, very bad." And I just said, "No, it's just fun. It's just a bit of fun." And this is why I'll never change my writing name as well, because of this other David Ellis lawyer. So what I suggest is that maybe you look up the very specific things like the 50 Shapes of Cakes or the Edgar Allan Poe book, It's See a Dream Within, or stuff like that. When you look me up on Amazon, you'll then get my actual Amazon profile. And so all of my books are on Amazon. I also use Drafter Digital, so a lot of them are available on other kind of platforms as well. If you are struggling to find me on either Amazon or elsewhere, and you get me mixed up with the other David Ellis, there's my website, which is Too Full to Write, and there's no number 2s. It's TOOFULLTOWRITE.com. And if you go there, then there will be a menu screen where you can select my books, and that'll have all of my own individual books there. What you won't have also is Auroras and Blossoms. And Auroras and Blossoms, the website is abpositiveart.com. And if you go to abpositiveart.com, there'll be something in the menu that says read. And if you click on read, you'll get all of the lovely books that we've got there as well. So the other 22 publications I'm involved with.
Oh, that's awesome. I think Christie's put the website up there too, as well, the Amazon site up there as well. So we look forward to speaking to you and your partner in crime coming up. I imagine it's a few weeks from now. So
yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
And I'm just conscious of your time. It's probably about 2:00 now in Kent. So
it is, yeah.
So thank you for staying up so late and being with us. We really appreciate it.
I loved every minute of it. Thank you.
That's awesome. So until next week, Christie and I hope that everyone stays safe, and we want you all to take care. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.